Bureaucracy. Bureaucracy never changes. The Romans used bureaucracy to maintain their slaves and wealth. Spain built an empire from its lust for gold and territory under the purview of bureaucrats. The mustached men shaped the battered German and Russian countrysides into economic superpowers, but bureaucracy never changes. Maybe it's actually quite ironic that a law system that only has 3 choices ends up being one of the law systems that I get asked about the most. People genuinely seem to have no idea how to make use of each bureaucratic system to its fullest, depending on the type of situation that their country is in. Make no mistake, there is no such thing as a useless bureaucratic system in Victoria 3. Even the one that you typically start with, Hereditary Bureaucracy, has an immense amount of value given that you're in the right circumstances to make full use of it. That would be why we're back with my next installment in my little Which Law Should You Pick franchise, showcasing a quick glossary explanation as to the value of each and every bureaucratic law in the game. I will also highlight ones that I feel are the most useful, as well as ones that I personally use the most. Just note, there will be no ranking, as the value of each law changes based on the issues that your country might face. I would like to point out that your favorite may not get that much of a highlight because of how simplified it might be. Appointed bureaucratic fans also will not be very happy with what I'm about to say, so please, brace yourself. But before we begin, I really would appreciate it if everybody dropped a comment, like, and subscribe. The engagement helps tiny channels like me get traction out in the big, terrifying algorithmic hellscape known as YouTube. Thank you if you do. You guys are kings. Anyhow, let's get into the video. To be perfectly honest, I would have expected the initial bureaucratic law to be one deliberately designed to be horrible. Yet, instead, what I find is that Hereditary Bureaucrats is probably the absolute best early game bureaucratic law for the mass majority of countries in the game. Though you clearly end up with a stronger landowner class as a result of the plus 25% bonus to political strength afforded to aristocrats, and aristocrats have a nasty tendency to fully support the landowners unabashedly. The trade-off is that you're given a very substantial minus 25% bureaucratic population cost modifier that offsets the cost of population immensely for effectively every single country out there. Another benefit that people might not see as an immediate benefit is the slight increase in contribution towards your investment pool due to the higher amount of aristocrats from the Hereditary Bureaucrats production method for government administrations. Though most people will overlook this due to the fact that you're giving up a small amount of clout for the intelligentsia for the equivalent of what amounts to pennies, especially since aristocrats typically command higher wages than their clerk contemporaries. That means you're pretty much paying more overall anyway. However, it seems that Paradox really put a lot of effort to make every bureaucracy law viable in its own way. A gigantic, spread-out country that does not come with a huge amount of tax capacity issues will absolutely adore the huge reduction from population that comes with this law. Austria, for instance, comes to mind when I think about this very situation, and they start with it. I would argue that even the United States would prefer this law at the very beginning of the game. Too bad they don't start with it. Unfortunately, it is painfully obvious that you're not intended to keep this law forever. Every country is eventually going to want to reduce the power of the landowners and aristocrats as much as possible to help them push through more intuitive and helpful laws. At the end of the day though, Hereditary Bureaucrats definitely is not the worst bureaucracy law by any measure. I do think it deserves its flowers for not being outright terrible, even if we're meant to pick other laws down the line. What I'm about to say might actually come off as a little bit controversial, especially since I know that there are a lot of players out there who will do everything in their power to maximize the clout of the intelligentsia in the early game to push through cultural laws and public schools faster. In fact, this law is so good at empowering the intelligentsia in the mid-game that you'll likely want to take it alongside technocracy should you be aiming for the euphoric achievement which requires you to pass state atheism law while the intelligentsia are powerful clout-wise. Just be careful when enacting this law too early, since beelining for appointed bureaucrats in the early game has the opposite effect to the clout of the intelligentsia. You can actually lose intelligentsia clout due to a large drop in aristocratic power, which makes up the bulk of the intelligentsia clout until they begin getting their clout from votes or from wealth outside of the aristocratic manor. Appointed bureaucrats is a perfect example of a hyper-specialized law that serves as a double-edged sword when used incorrectly. It can be extremely powerful towards controlling clout, but it comes at the cost of its rather weak effects outside of clout. One would likely take a look at the plus 25% taxation capacity and think of it as highly useful, yet the countries that can actually make use of this taxation capacity bonus will likely have to fight tooth and nail to actually pass this law early enough to make use of it. Even if you do manage to get this law passed early, taxation capacity isn't so devastating for most countries that appointed bureaucrats would offer much benefit anyways. Large sprawling countries with minor taxation issues like Austria and the United States can automatically resolve their issues when they get the central archives technology and the standardized filing system production method for government administrations. That might be why I think this law really only has any use for Qing up until the moment you get telephones. Even backward countries like Russia and Japan can get their taxation capacity issues under control with central archives without overspending too much. Or, hear me out here, you don't really have to fix the tax capacity for every state. If you're only building in a few states anyways, which you should be, focus only on the tax capacity for those states. If you don't build in states with tax capacity issues, you will not really care about those tax capacity issues in the first place, will you? Who cares if the private sector builds a few buildings in a minus 50% tax state? Your main states are humming along at 30% of your country's GDP anyway. Unfortunately, this means I consider appointed bureaucrats to be a bit of a beginner's trap. Not only is it too costly to take too early, but its effects are too weak to be worth taking in the mid-game, excluding a very few specialized scenarios, namely Qing. While at the same time, taking appointed bureaucrats takes away the interest groups that would have wanted to go for elected bureaucrats in the first place, making it harder to switch off of appointed bureaucrats should you take it. If you could not tell by now, I do not like appointed bureaucrats. If I start with it, I might keep it, but I do not go out of my way to pass it unless I am playing Qing. Do you know that I cannot help but be impressed at the slow, methodical evolution of bureaucratic laws in Victoria 3? Remember how I said before that Hereditary Bureaucrats is actually a very powerful starting law and it's useful up to a certain point in the game? Well, that point in the game is when you start piling up institutions, and the amount of bureaucratic usage towards maintaining those institutions greatly dwarfs the cost that you're paying towards your states and your population. That is the point when hereditary bureaucrats stop being useful and becomes a bit of a liability. That is when you want to aim for elected bureaucrats. I know, elected bureaucrats will greatly increase the power of the rather irritating petite bourgeoisie, but the returns in the savings will be more than worth passing this law. Just note that even though the peanut butter interest group gets power, the landowners in turn will weaken substantially as aristocrats will be further gutted. It is not unheard of to push the landowners under 5% clout when you're likely to take this law in the mid-game. I would, however, maintain the weakness of the elected bureaucrats is that it is outright boring. Besides empowering the PB a little, it has nothing else of note that makes it stand out, making it the equivalent of a mandate choice. As a result, I cannot help but find myself usually passing the bureaucracy laws last. Bureaucracy issues can always be fixed with a few extra government administrations should you run into any major deficits, so I end up prioritizing passing far more important laws like children's rights, internal security, migration, citizenship, or even church and state. That means that even though I prefer elected bureaucrats over hereditary bureaucrats in the mid to late game, I rarely ever end up taking this law unless there is absolutely nothing else to pass in the meantime. If I do end up with elected bureaucrats in the mid game, it's because I haven't got the technologies to do the more important laws yet. Thank you for watching all the way through. You guys are truly kings. I'd like to apologize for how hoarse my voice can sound right now. I am a bit sick while recording this video, unfortunately. And I know it is the end of the video, so not many people will see this, but I'd like to thank everybody for all of the support I have been receiving lately, particularly Patrick and JM Barbarossa for their recent donations on my last stream, as well as my newest YouTube Premium and Patreon members, Sharky Boy Gaming, Stephen B, Bryn Glasgow, and Stancio Niku. I'll make sure to shout you guys out properly at the beginning of the upcoming tier list video, so this end credit shoutout will just have to do until then. At the same time, make sure to subscribe to Sharky Boy Gaming's channel since he's also starting up as a new Victoria 3 YouTuber, and I do think he deserves your support because he's pretty darn good at it. Anyhow, people, make sure to give your loved ones an extra hug today. Forgive the people in your life a little bit more if you're not in any danger of doing so. Be good to your friends and family and spend as much time as you can with them. They are not here forever, and neither are you. Do what it takes to enjoy your life. Good night, everybody, and always remember, Hail Hydra Cat.